Hello, I'm Chris Goldthorpe with ChrisChess.com, and this is going to be part of a series more aimed at instructors of chess for young beginners and beginners in general, for that matter. One of the subjects that is typically mishandled is openings preparation. And obviously beginners need to have some sort of idea as to what openings they're going to play. And a good chess instructor is going to know a lot more than chess and have an understanding of psychology of the student in front of them. How ambitious are they? How confident are they? How fragile is their ego? There are different approaches that I'm going to describe. And then let's talk about the effect of openings on their overall results. And one of the ways that you can independently gauge that is if you go through thousands of games, looking at the evaluation after each move. And yes, there are good tools to do that recently. You can see how little correlation there is, even in games of very strong players, between how the game is going after the published moves of the opening and the middle game, just 10 moves later. There's not much correlation. Beginners don't lose games primarily because they don't know the opening, but sometimes they get into serious trouble in the opening. So there's two philosophies that you can follow, and you can occasionally switch from one to the other, but you want to avoid that. The one is for safety, especially as white. I don't really like to do this unless the student is really not confident and may have too much of an aversion to losing games quickly. And so I'll describe that one first. Their white repertoire is going to be based on the Kali system, which is D4 opening. And then they're going to make these first two moves every time. So it's easy to remember. The strategy is simple too, is to get this pawn all the way up with enough pieces guarding it, typically this bishop and this knight. So the knights are going to guard each other. So they're going to always start with this first move. And there's not much they can do, not much black can do to prevent this from being white's next move. The only thing that would make this not the next move, and then that's what you would go over with them, your student, who is the black pieces. You say, when is this not an appropriate move for white? And that would be if black plays this. Now, this doesn't happen a lot at lower levels, and it's not difficult to have your student well-versed enough in this opening. At lower levels, black only plays this for a few cheap traps, which you as the instructor should be familiar with. So, in particular, just playing knight to c3 by black sometime early on keeps all the traps from happening. This pawn is guarded. For that matter, if they're familiar with some king pawn openings, when black plays e5, they can just play e4, and it's a very stable kind of a position because the central pawn structure is resolved immediately. You just play e4. So e4 is one thing that black could play that might throw white off. If they do this, white can simply push the pawn forward. And if black goes here, then of course you're going to tell him to move the pawn up and attack the knight. And all of those moves are very rare, even at the beginner level. Almost always black is going to move a knight out, move a pawn, or do something where knight f3 on the second move is appropriate. So, and this is very common with beginners. So white goes here. Black makes some move. Now among beginners, you'll see him make this knight to c6 move, which it's easy enough to tell your student, as white or black, when both of these queen pawns are advanced, to not block the c pawn. But it's not such an important detail in terms of the statistics of their results. So from there, the next goal over the next two moves is to get the bishop here. And you can simply ask your student, is this move safe? If they don't answer, then ask them how pawns capture. And then ask them, can the knight go there? Ask them to count how many black pieces are covering this square. So you go here. Black makes, now anytime black makes this move, white's going to make this move. If black moves his knight out, you make this move so that the knight can't attack the bishop. And these are not a lot of details to remember. This provides a retreat square for the bishop once it's here, in the event that black makes this advancing move that attacks the bishop. So just memorizing this pawn structure is simple enough, even for very new players with ratings like below 800. So you create this structure, and then you get the bishop here. And then if black is prepared to safely make this move, then you want to make your e4 move. The only thing black can do to absolutely prevent e4 is to play sort of a Dutch defense-like structure with this pawn at f5. And I never see that happen with players under 1200. If they do, then, you know, you may need to have another discussion with your student. But for young developing players, this is very little to know, and it's a very simple strategy that you're just going to try to get your pawn to here. Now, if he wants to go here and pin your knight, which is not a terrible move, you're still going to go here. And if he takes, you take back with the queen, and it gives even more pressure on e4. Anytime he goes here, you can just back up. And it's not really even a good move for black. But the reason I like this for beginners is because it's a very simple strategy. You're just going to try to get this move in. And if he takes, don't let him trade a knight for a bishop. And that's about all you need to know. And all the structural based strategies are the same when you play as black. So if they're playing as the black pieces, they can play the French defense or the Caro-Kann. And then go for that same pawn structure, which is why you might want to use the Caro-Kann. But if they play in this manner, you can tell them that when they play online, they can just pre-move this move. It doesn't matter what move white makes. Your next move is going to be d5. There's nothing that, well, yeah, there is one way that you might not play d5. If he goes here. Now with a more intelligent or slightly older student, you might ask him in this position, is there anything that white could do? Or instead, if he plays d4 first, and then you go here, ask him, is there any move that white could play where you would not play d5 on the next move. And if they don't find it, you give them a hint. It's a bishop move. Of course, you would take the free bishop. And a player who's weak enough to play that way is probably going to lose to black anyway. So you're looking for the exceptions to the rule first, just as when you played white. And then otherwise you just have this rule. You play e6 as your first move. Before you even see what white's first move is, you can make it a pre-move if you play online. And then don't pre-move d5, because if he goes here, you're going to take the bishop for free. So after e6, your next move is d5. And then you can give him as much training in the French defense as black as you can. So right away, they're playing an opening that their opponent at lower levels doesn't see very often, that they come to understand better than their opponent, and play the French defense as black. If white goes for a Queen's Gambit sort of a setup, that's fine. You still go here. And number one, this is not going to happen very often at lower levels. All those kids almost always start with e4 or try to get into an e4 position. But this is also very safe for black. You can teach them about some of the traps in the Cambridge Springs variation. And I have a video on this channel concerning the Cambridge Springs, where black goes here. It's an absolutely sound variation that a grandmaster could play against a grandmaster if they didn't prefer some of the openings that they prefer instead. And this pawn will go here, and again you have the same pawn structure and the same sort of strategies, only your queen will go out here and the bishop will go out to here. And there's some nasty traps for white to fall into, which are covered in my video on the Cambridge Springs defense. So this is a opening preparation as white and as black for a less confident player who is not inclined to spend time studying openings. Now, if your student is more ambitious and more confident, I recommend having them play something like e4 on the first move. And if they really like action and they're willing to lose some games to win some games as opposed to simply have draws where they don't lose, then I would recommend some very pyrotechnic openings to start with, where they can learn to appreciate dynamics, such as some of the gambits that you would never see between really strong players or correspondence players. But failing that, this very conventional approach here enables your student, when they're playing white, to have positions that they're going to see often and get good experience in them. And I recommend the Italian game. Even top grandmasters are now switching from the Ruy Lopez to the Italian game, because in the Ruy Lopez, black has been doing very well with the Berlin defense. I have a video on how to play black against the Ruy Lopez, which gives several different approaches. Of course, that is aimed at a stronger class of player than this video. So after this move, they only need to be prepared for 4 different moves, and at first you're just going to prepare them for 2 of them. I recommend teaching about this one first, because this move gives beginners a lot of trouble as black. In particular, if black knows this move, which they ought to if they were your student playing black. Of course, a beginner who plays the French defense never needs to worry about this. There's this, and this very logical move leads to a lot of action. Now in practice, black does badly with this when both players are beginners. However, with a little practice, this is not necessarily winning for white, but your student as white, familiar with this, is going to be very confident and have a good time playing it, and I think they'll score well and learn a lot about openings and dynamics in general by playing this way, the fried liver, even if d4 is theoretically better. So, and you as the instructor should know these main lines. So when your student plays e4, you're going to be aiming for this is actually called the Fagiletto attack. This is not the fried liver unless you go to knight takes f7. That's the fried liver attack. This is just the main line 2 knights defense. Now, if your student doesn't want to get into all the complications of knight g5, another gambit move to be taught is d4. But if they just want to play it safe, which is not a bad strategy when you play against lower rated players, if you have a 900 rated student going against a 400 rated opponent, they'll find blunders to make with a safe move like this. So it doesn't matter a whole lot what they play. Also, beginners tend to put, even stronger players, put way too much emphasis on the opening. Again, even when you look at the games of world-class players, there's very little correlation between how well they're doing after the opening and how well they're doing just 10 moves later. Very little correlation. So people are at all levels are winning and losing their games because of the middle game. Beginners often lose a game because of silly tactical mistakes. Even players up to like 2000 will play like grandmaster moves on both sides, and then all of a sudden somebody makes a move where they give away a whole piece or overlook a mate in 2, even in slower time controls. So the important thing is that they don't fall into some of these silly traps. For example, let's suppose white goes here and black goes here, and then your student does this and black does this. There's a reason why we don't see that move often, because it's a horrible move. However, if white takes the bait, which they will often do, when they see a move that they recognize is not good, they begin to underestimate their opponent. So maybe they take the pawn. Now, you as the instructor, I'm going to assume that you've seen all about this trap before. And this can turn out very badly for white. But I do not recommend for your student to try for very silly traps that only work by extreme ignorance of the opponent. Like maybe you've seen this one. And now this depends on white making this, the mistake that he just made. And if he takes the queen, then you checkmate him. Well, big deal. White made a lot of stupid blunders for this to occur. One of the other things you'll go over with your opponent, I mean your student early on, is that if they play e5, and again, if you just have them playing the French defense, you don't even have to worry about this. But if they play e5 and then white does this, I mean, we know it's not a good move, and you can tell your opponent, I mean your student who's playing the black pieces here, this is a move you should not make as white. When white does that, you guard the pawn this way, but they may make a mistake. This move will win some games against terrible players, but then as soon as black catches on, it's empty. And there are some good videos besides mine on the internet about how to handle this. But it's sufficient for your student as black just to know like these first 4 moves by black. This is as far as they need to know. If they get this far, they're likely not going to fall into any big problem. And then if they get to safely make this move, black might reasonably hope to come out winning. But it's something that a beginner who plays e5 as black needs to be prepared for. And if they play the French defense, they don't have to worry about it at all. So now that same student as black, what would you have them play? If they're not going to play the French defense, if they're a more ambitious player and they like tactics and action, you can play e5. But that player has to be prepared for queen h5 when they're a complete beginner. They might need to have some knowledge on the first, I would say the first 4 or 5 moves. But when you go over their games, I would only focus on the opening in those cases where they got themselves into irretrievable deep trouble right in the opening, where there was a position that's going to come up again and again, and they need to know what to do. For example, if black plays the 2 knights defense, they need to know what to do in this position, and they need to choose a variation here. Now, the Ulvested variation is very powerful in practice, because who's going to play bishop to f1 here? I mean, unless you really know this opening, you're not going to play it. And beginners don't get this played against them. However, this is a strong opening, the Fritz variation, and so is this. But I don't recommend having your student play this. It's too dangerous, and to play this as white or black is kind of dangerous. But as white, you're going to invite this. But this is one case where if black doesn't know what to play, he could get himself in trouble because of the opening. But in terms of actual results, almost everything that really matters happens in the middle game and is the result of gross, careless mistakes. So it's much more important that they're simply careful to look for checks and captures on every move. So you now have a way to teach an opening system to less ambitious and more cautious players that's based on playing e6 and then d5 almost every time. And as white, such a player, the less confident or less ambitious younger player who might not react so well to losing, which is in itself a subject you need to go into with the parent's help. They can play d4 on the first move and try to play the Kali system, and they both can have this pawn structure with all the pawns on the opposite color of themselves. Queen 4, king 3 and queen's bishop 3, which for black is going to be d5, c6, e6, for white d4, e3, and c3. Because it's a simple strategy to get e4 in. You get this knight here, you get this bishop here, and you end up pushing your pawn up. And you take back with your knight. Rarely do people get in trouble with that in the opening. Some players have gotten all the way to 2100 or so playing nothing but that as white. But the ones who like to have the tactics, you can have them play e4, and then if black doesn't go for the two knights defense and instead plays this, the ones who really like tactics, you can start teaching them Evans Gambit and show them a lot of beautiful games by dynamic players. But what they need to understand is that sacrifices don't work by magic, and they do require a lot of exact calculations, some of which younger or newer players are not capable of yet. But the Evans Gambit does well even at very high rating levels. But otherwise, I would recommend to just play c3. Now, grandmasters play d3 here, so they would likely tell their student to do that. But we should remember that you're training your student to play other people who are at their level. And at the lower levels, d4 does best. And this move does very well at lower levels. However, this move, which is theoretically just equal, where white's supposed to play this bishop move, and then black just takes this pawn, and then things are equal. This move, which is actually not really sound, notice the evaluation goes negative for black, but like the Evans Gambit, lots of stuff happens bad to black in this line. So again, if you're the instructor and you're teaching this line, you'll know some of the lines that you can play. So in terms of opening, you're mainly just trying to get your student through the opening without any terrible mishap happening. Beyond that, their results are going to be determined by how well they do in the middle game, which is about 99% paying attention to threatening and forcing moves. So try this on your new students and see how they do. In particular, if they're too worried about the opening more than they should be, point out to them those cases where, you know, you can say, well, you were doing fine in the opening, and the only reason you lost this game is because you gave away your knight here on this move, or whatever their blunder was. Say, look, here you allowed a mate and won, but you're actually winning in this position. Or maybe they're only worse off a little bit, but then they allow a terrible blunder, and that's what changed everything. So keep it in perspective, and every student should know that everybody loses half their games. Unless you're the world champion or unless you just started, almost everybody scores about 50% because you tend to be matched with players who are at your same level. And good luck. Again, I'm always available for consultation with students and other trainers with the phone number up here. My email address is chris@chrischess.com, and the website is chrischess.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.